All right, good morning, Evergreen. It's an early morning for you. I appreciate you coming to speak with us so early. I'm Jen Howell. I'm the co-executive director of Virginia Civics.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Tom Tinder.
And this is Emmanuel Caudillo, Senior Advisor with the White House Hispanic Prosperity Initiative in Washington, D.C. Good morning.
Good afternoon. My name is Shreya Narayan. Good morning. My name is Shreya Narayan.
Good morning. My name is Derek Yao.
My name is Malin Tai.
Good morning. My name is Ajit Venkatesh, and we'd like to introduce our wonderful teacher, Ms. Kessler.
Hello, welcome. All right, well, there's no surprise today what our question is. We're going to look at question number 2. Quote, no society, certainly not a large and heterogeneous one, can fail in time to explode if it is deprived of the arts of compromise. No good society can be unprincipled, and no viable society can be principle-ridden. Do you agree or disagree with this opinion? What compromises were made at the Constitutional Convention of 1787? What are the benefits and costs of those compromises? How would you distinguish between someone who is unprincipled and someone who is principle-ridden? You may begin.
We agree with Bickel's opinion that the art of compromise is as essential to a well-functioning and diverse society as are the principles that it is based on. The principles form the foundation of governance in the form of laws and policies, as chaos reigns in an unprincipled society. However, it is necessary to reach a compromise between the various principles to account for the complex realities. If not, we run the risk of being principle-ridden or driven by principle alone to the detriment of progress. This art of synergistic compromise was amply demonstrated at the Philadelphia Convention through the 5 key compromises. Compromise is equally essential in the United States today, given the gamut of differences in rural versus urban lifestyles, professions, socioeconomic, and racial diversity.
The 5 Keystone Compromises for the ratification of the U.S. Constitution at the Philadelphia Convention serve as a beacon of the art of compromise as the founders reconciled the differences in principle of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists and the North versus the South.
The first Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Compromise, combined the opposing plans by adopting a bicameral Congress, where the Senate would be based on equal representation and the House of Representatives on proportional representation. The advantage was that it empowered smaller states. However, the lingering downside is that states with smaller populations have a disproportionately larger voice in the nation's Senate, leading to pork projects or earmarks.
The Commerce Compromise was a synergistic resolution when the interests of the industrialized North were in direct conflict with the agriculture-reliant South. It mandated import tariffs, federal regulation of interstate commerce, and new legislation through a 2/3 Senate majority. It was a win-win that empowered the South while bolstering American production. Its legacy continues in the delicate balance between job-promoting tariffs and the disadvantage of increased costs for all consumers.
On the other hand, the 3/5 Compromise is an example of a negative compromise. It allowed Southern states to count its enslaved population for the purposes of taxation and additional representation, where each enslaved person would represent 3/5 of a white person. The South wanted to count their enslaved population for greater political power, whereas the North opposed it, as the representation claimed by the South was non-existent, because enslaved populations lacked voting rights, and as a result, the additional representatives would not truly represent the interests of the enslaved population.
The compromise on the trade of enslaved people reflects the concessions on slavery made by the North to appease the South, who opposed governmental interference and insisted that the keeping of enslaved were vital to their economy. This has the disadvantage of reinforcing slavery, deporting fugitive slaves, and letting slavery thrive.
The Electoral College Compromise resolved the presidential election process through electoral intermediaries appointed by the state who cast the actual ballots for the presidency. The creation of an electoral college mitigated the risk of an uninformed voting population by ruling by majority and preventing Congress from having influence within the executive branch.
The key differentiator between unprincipled and principle-ridden actions is what lies at the foundation of the argument: pragmatism that considers the reality of the situation, or principle for the sake of principle. A modern day example of being principle ridden without pragmatic consideration is the idea of no tax increases in the realm of fiscal conservatism. The justification for this line of reasoning is trickle-down economics, where giving tax breaks to the richer would direct more money into capital investments, thus increasing economic activity. This logic, while it may hold true for smaller businesses, is not as effective when applied to large corporations, as economic incentives only saturate previously stable market relationships and give unfair artificial advantages to already powerful corporations that in the long run hurt smaller businesses and damage the market forces of the invisible hand of which they purport to protect.
A compromise in this scenario would be tax breaks for small businesses while not providing economic incentives for mega corporations and not rigidly adhering to the big principle of no tax increases.
Thus, we agree with Bickle that a diverse society needs to deploy prudence to strike a balance between being unprincipled and principle-ridden for effective governing, justice, and leadership. As illustrated by the Great Compromises, this requires both intellectual capacity and temperamental disposition that considers the complex reality of the setting, seeing the opposing point of view, evaluating its merits, and deciding the best course forward, which in essence is compromise. Thank you. We are ready for questions.
Excellent, thank you. Do you think it's more difficult for Americans to compromise over some of today's major public issues? And if you do think it's more difficult, why?
I do believe that it's more difficult for Americans to compromise over today's issues simply because we're not communicating with each other as much. Most of our communication is done through online, and we lack having conversations that are productive, especially given the drastic partisanship of today, where Democrats versus Republicans is very split, and you can really see the difference.
I agree with my colleague that political polarization is definitely an issue. One factor of this would be probably, as my colleague mentioned, communication. As you know, primarily the method of communication today is through like social platforms, and these platforms typically only would show you the voices that you want to hear, which creates this feedback loop, which results in even more inflamed opinions rather than actual communication between both sides and compromise.
You mentioned the Electoral College. There's now some discussion about maybe changes to be made in that, either changes in the Electoral College or going to a popular vote, which a popular vote of president. What is your opinion regarding those changes? Should they be made? And if so, why? Or why not?
I do not believe that we should be making changes to the Electoral College, because transitioning to an entirely majority vote could pose the risk of the rule by majority, where the voice of just like a 60% could completely override the voice of the other 40%, and as a result, we would have the tyranny of the majority. And as for that.
Sorry, you can, okay. However, at the same time, I would also state that there is some reform that is necessary to to the Electoral College system that is implemented right now. For example, I would specifically talk about how certain individuals who hold differential beliefs than what the rest of their than what the majority of their state believes are being overshadowed by the majority. For example, someone who believes in Republican ideals in the state of Washington, or someone who believes in Democratic ideals in the state of Texas. To solve this issue, I would basically recommend a system that is similar to what is implemented in Maine today, where the Electoral College is proportional to the amount of voters for each party.
Well, my next question, you talked about it earlier in your discussion on social media and how it's kind of like a feedback loop. So let's dig much deeper into social media and compromise. And so how has social media made it more difficult for compromise, for our national leaders or elected officials to compromise? And what would you do to help fix that? What are some of your ideas? This is just like I said, so I'll just share it to you.
Okay. I believe that social media makes it more difficult to compromise because when we have these national leaders and politicians, they have these very strong like voter bases, and instead of making compromises to appeal to new voters, to appeal like, maybe change their opinions or revise their opinions, instead what they want to do, what they want to appeal to is their voter base, and so they just continuously spout like what appeals to their voter base, and instead of like compromising and increasingly inflaming the situation, like perhaps like using like rhetoric that they believe instead of actually like considering both sides, or just not listening, or just like, as we know, Twitter spats are a thing nowadays between politicians instead of informed discussion. And I think that's just a tragedy, and it's also because of social media.
I agree with my colleague, and I also believe that this is also due to the algorithms that social media uses. So, if I'm a person who believes in Republican ideals, then when I go online and I focus on a lot of these Republican politicians, then I will be getting a lot of the same information rather than expanding my views. And that's solely because of the algorithm that social media uses. And so I believe that on political platforms, a way to change this is to simply change the algorithm and give multiple different viewpoints so that people can consider the opposing ideas and perhaps just come up with a compromise, or at least consider a compromise.
Adding on to what my colleagues have previously said, I would also state that compromise requires both a change in mindset as well as requires a change in mindset. This requires certain social media platforms to essentially state messages that have the ability to change that mindset. That would essentially allow for compromise in the most efficient method.
So you mentioned in your opening statement sort of win-win compromises versus negative compromises. So what are the characteristics that define a win-win versus a negative compromise? And sort of how can we avoid those negative compromises in the future?
So the definition of compromise is when two groups are looking for change and it's conflicting, then both groups sort of give up a little and both groups gain a little bit. And we can see that in some of the compromises that we mentioned. But then some of the other compromises are kind of unfair or more one-sided. And to be honest, you can only kind of see that with hindsight. But I think just making sure that a compromise is equal and both groups are gaining the same amount as they're losing.
I would also, adding on to what my colleague has previously said, I would also talk about certain examples of a positive compromise as well as a negative compromise. And a specific example of a positive compromise that not only benefits our modern day compromise, that not only benefits all the people, but also allows for certain individuals to both political parties to agree on that compromise would be Biden's running policy, our president's running policy on healthcare, where he decided that it would be best to take a two-pronged approach where we would not only set up certain infrastructure for public healthcare, but also allow for private healthcare. This is very appealing to the Republican side of you. However, this was also taken very negatively by his base because I believe that they had a very very principle-ridden mindset.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I wish we had more time too. Great job, guys. I mean, really, really excellent work. The first thing I wrote down when you were doing your opening statement was, you have an excellent writer. whoever, if that was a team effort or whoever put that opening statement together, you do have a way with words, and it just goes so far in getting your point across. I thought that the insight into the feedback loop on social media was great. I have a national security podcast that goes into these issues every week. And it just seems to be something that not a lot of people understand, but you guys got it. And you guys also, understood the role that not just people, but social media companies have to play as sort of the arbiters of truth in that arena. I also really liked your definition of compromise there in the Q&A, and I think that maybe some of that language would have also been helpful in your prepared statement. But you guys really have a firm grasp of this topic, and I think you have some great ideas for how to solve some of these big issues that we're confronted with. And I just want to congratulate you on a well thought out, well put together presentation.
Even though it is early in the morning out there, and even though we feel that you were undoubtedly up late last night, you made a great presentation. And the reason that I say you were up late last night is because you took the comments, the general comments that we made to you yesterday after your presentation, and you incorporated all of those comments into your presentation today. We mentioned to you about examples, give more examples, and you gave a great example on that no tax increase position. Suggested to you that you might want to look at other sides of a particular issue. And you did that perfectly on 2 or 3 occasions. You did a good presentation yesterday, as I told you. Well, you stepped it up today and did a much better presentation today, and I want to commend you on that. I really don't have much else to say to you. I agree with Jen that it's a wonderful story that you tell in your initial 4-minute presentation. Just a very, very good job, and congratulations to you. And I want to say lastly, congratulations to your teacher and your mentors and whoever has helped you. But also congratulations to you for a job well done. We mentioned to you yesterday that you all have a great future ahead of you if you continue to utilize your knowledge and your leadership skills. Please do that so that you'll have a better school, you'll have a better community, a better state, and we'll have a better nation. We wish you the very best of luck in all your future activities. Congratulations to you. Thank you very much.
I'd like to commend you on a great presentation. I really like the energy you brought forth in your opening statement. The teamwork, you all work well really together. And so that's very important, and I appreciate it. It makes it easy to follow along. And that's just adding on to my fellow judges on the examples and the different topics that you presented. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's a very important topic with regards to compromise, and something that we are dealing with today, and also something that we'll be all dealing with in the future as well, especially as you go completing middle school to high school and college and beyond. So I commend you to continue focusing on these issues, digging deeper into these issues, and finding ways to say, hey, you know what, the status quo ain't working. We need to compromise more. Let's lead the way there. And so I commend you on that. And once again, thank you so much for the past 2 days, to hearing your thoughts, your insights on these important topics. And I wish you the best. Thank you so much.